The hotel lobby was buzzing with afternoon guests, families checking in, business travelers rushing past, and bellboys wheeling luggage in every direction. Victor, the hotel manager, strutted behind the front desk like he owned the place. His gold watch caught the light with every dramatic gesture, and his tie was perfectly adjusted, or so he thought. Suddenly, a man walked in. Nothing flashy, no suit, no limousine, no entourage. Just a simple jacket, worn jeans, and a quiet presence that somehow cut through the chaos of the lobby. He carried a small bag in one hand and wore a calm, unbothered expression on his face. Guests barely noticed him, except for the ones closest to the front desk. Victor's eyes immediately scanned the man and narrowed. Something about him rubbed the manager the wrong way. He straightened up, cleared his throat, and barked, "Welcome to Royal Crest Hotel. Are you a guest with a reservation, or are you just here to waste my time?" The man didn't flinch. He simply smiled faintly and replied, "Just a room for the night. Something simple will do." Victor's lip curled into a sneer. "Simple? In this hotel? People like you don't belong in a place like this. You're not the kind of client we serve." A few guests turned their heads, sensing the tension, while staff exchanged nervous glances. There was something about the calmness of the man that unsettled Victor, but he refused to let it show. He puffed out his chest, slammed his hand on the counter, and shouted, "I said, get out. This is a luxury hotel. Only real clients allowed." The man didn't move. He simply looked at Victor with eyes that seemed to weigh the arrogance of the manager against a quiet patience that could last forever. Victor's face turned red with frustration. "You think you can just walk in here, act humble, and get away with it?" He leaned forward and, without thinking, slapped the man across the face. The lobby went completely silent. Guests froze. Phones hovered mid-air, capturing the shocking moment. Victor straightened, proud of his so-called authority, while the man merely wiped his cheek, nodded once, and turned to leave. Nobody knew yet that the man they had all just witnessed being humiliated was Steven Seagal, billionaire and the true owner of the very hotel Victor thought he controlled. And what happened next would forever change Victor's life and teach everyone in that lobby a lesson about arrogance, respect, and the quiet power of humility. It was a busy afternoon at the Royal Crest Hotel, one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. Guests hurried past with suitcases, chatting in hurried tones, while bellboys raced back and forth, balancing towering stacks of luggage. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, and marble floors reflected the bright sunlight streaming through the enormous glass doors. It should have been a place of calm, but at that moment, it felt more like a battlefield. Victor, the hotel manager, moved through the lobby like a general inspecting his troops. Every step was precise, every gesture exaggerated. He barked orders at staff who scrambled to obey. "Hurry, don't just stand there, carry it faster." His gold watch glinted as he waved his hands dramatically, and he adjusted his tie as though to remind everyone who was in charge. Customers glanced over, some rolling their eyes, others subtly avoiding his gaze. Victor loved this power. The way people responded to him out of fear. He believed authority was about being loud, aggressive, and showing everyone that he was untouchable. But then, a man walked in. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, no limousine, no entourage, no security detail. Just a quiet presence that seemed completely at odds with the chaos around him. Worn jeans, a faded jacket, simple shoes, calm eyes that scanned the lobby but never lingered, and a relaxed posture that radiated self-confidence without arrogance. He approached the front desk and set down a small leather bag. Victor's sharp eyes immediately noticed the plainness of the man's clothing. He frowned. Something about him felt wrong. Not wrong in danger, but wrong in the sense that Victor couldn't figure out why he seemed so calm, so composed. He stepped forward, voice dripping with authority. "Welcome to the Royal Crest Hotel," Victor said, chest puffed up. "Do you have a reservation? Or are you just wandering in hoping we'll take pity on you?" The man didn't flinch. He smiled faintly, a subtle, knowing smile that didn't reveal anything. "Just a room for the night," he said quietly. "Something simple will do." Victor scoffed loudly, the sound echoing off the marble walls. "Simple? In this hotel? People like you don't belong here. I run a luxury establishment, and we don't have time for your kind." He gestured vaguely at the lobby, as if everyone here could somehow tell the difference between real clients and those he deemed unworthy. Some guests turned their heads to watch. Some staff stiffened, unsure whether to intervene. Victor loved the attention. He thrived on it. But what he didn't notice was the calm, unshakable confidence in the man in front of him, a quiet presence that could make anyone who underestimated him regret it. Victor leaned over the counter. "Listen, I don't know why you think you can just waltz in here, act humble, and get away with it. You need to leave before I call security." The man remained silent. Not a word. Just a slow, deliberate nod, as though he were already weighing the situation and deciding that patience was a far more powerful weapon than anger. Victor's face turned red. His veins throbbed with frustration. How dare someone treat him, the manager, with such calm disrespect? His hands trembled slightly as he gestured at the guest, then, in a sudden burst of anger, slapped him across the face. The lobby went silent. Guests froze mid-step. Phones hovered in mid-air, some already recording. A bellboy dropped a suitcase. Staff looked around nervously, unsure if they should intervene or stay out of the manager's way. The audacity of the man before Victor had triggered a reaction he had never felt before: disbelief at his own impulse. The man wiped his cheek, looked at Victor once, and nodded slowly, almost like a teacher observing a misbehaving student. There was no anger in his eyes, no retaliation, just calm, piercing clarity. Victor straightened, chest heaving, proud of his so-called authority. "That's right, don't think you can disrespect me," he barked. Guests murmured. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to laugh or be shocked. It was then that an old bellboy, who had been watching from the corner, leaned slightly forward. Something about the man's face looked familiar. He had seen it somewhere before, in magazines, on TV, in business news, about a man who owned more than just buildings. He owned respect, influence, and power on a scale Victor could barely imagine. But the bellboy didn't say a word. Who would believe him? This guest looked ordinary, poor even, and yet his presence felt commanding. The man turned to leave. Slowly, quietly, Victor felt a flicker of unease. Something was off, but he couldn't pinpoint it. He waved his hand dismissively. "Get out before I really call security." As the man walked toward the sliding doors, a few guests whispered to each other. Some nudged their friends. Phones were raised, cameras recording, hearts racing. Everyone could sense that this wasn't just another hotel guest. Something about him, the calm, quiet confidence, demanded attention, and though no one knew it yet, the man walking out of that lobby was Steven Seagal, billionaire, hotel chain owner, and a man whose quiet authority made the loudest, angriest people like Victor seem small and powerless. And what would happen next? That hotel manager had no idea that his entire world was about to be flipped upside down, and that the guest he had slapped would soon show him the true meaning of power, humility, and respect. Tell us in the comments which city and country are you watching from. The hotel lobby was silent now, though the usual hum of activity lingered in the background like a nervous heartbeat. Guests who had been quietly observing the exchange stared wide-eyed, unable to look away. Phones were held in mid-air, capturing every moment of the shocking encounter. Some whispered to each other, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness what was unfolding. Victor, the manager, stood rigid behind the desk, chest heaving. His face was red, veins bulging in his temples. For the first time in his career, he felt powerless. He had slapped a man he assumed was a nobody, a simple, quiet guest. Yet, that very composure, the lack of reaction, unsettled him more than any anger or threat ever could. "Out! Now!" Victor barked, pointing toward the sliding doors. The man, Steven Seagal, didn't flinch. Not a word, not a gesture of complaint. He simply nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as though acknowledging the manager's authority while silently dismissing its significance. It was a subtle power that pierced through Victor's arrogance like a sharp blade. Victor's mind raced. How could someone remain so calm after being slapped? He had expected a reaction, an apology, a retreat, even a fight, but nothing. Just calm, confidence, and something more. A quiet weight that seemed to say, "I am more powerful than you, even if you don't see it yet." The manager's staff shifted uneasily behind him. Some tried to step in, others froze. One young clerk whispered to a colleague, "He's not even reacting. What is he?" But before anyone could answer, Victor's frustration reached a tipping point. You think you can just stroll in here, look humble, and get away with disrespecting me? Victor yelled, voice trembling with rage. I am the manager of this hotel. I decide who stays and who goes. You. He slammed his hand on the counter, rattling papers. You will not humiliate me in front of my guests. Then, in a move that shocked everyone even further, Victor snatched the man's small bag from the counter and threw it across the floor. A few contents, scattered papers, a notebook, a pen, yet the man didn't move to pick them up. He simply bent down slowly, retrieved the items, and replaced them in his bag, all with the same calm, deliberate precision. Sometimes arrogance blinds the eyes that should see, Steven said quietly, his voice calm but resonant, carrying across the lobby. His words were deliberate, measured, and somehow heavier than Victor's shouting. Guests and staff alike turned their attention to him. Sensing that these were not idle words, Victor sneered, his ego unable to process the quiet power before him. Enough of your riddles, he barked. I don't know who you think you are, but this hotel is my domain. With that, he did something even more shocking. In a flurry of ego-fueled rage, Victor slapped Steven across the face again. The room froze entirely. Guests gasped, some gasped aloud. Phones captured the moment, the shock etched into every witness's face. A child whimpered, an elderly woman clutched her purse. Even the bellboy, who had been observing from the side, stumbled backward in surprise. And still, Steven didn't retaliate. He simply wiped his cheek, straightened his jacket, and looked Victor directly in the eyes. There was no hatred, no fear, only calm assessment. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Victor, in all his arrogance, had assumed power came from volume, aggression, and intimidation. But here, in this quiet, deliberate gaze, he was confronted by true authority. Authority that didn't need to shout or strike to command respect. Some guests whispered among themselves. Who is he? One asked. I think he's someone important, another replied. But no one knew exactly why the air around him seemed different, heavier, more commanding than any billionaire, CEO, or celebrity they had ever seen. Victor's rage spiraled. He lunged forward, pointing an accusing finger. You think this is funny? You think a simple guest can mock me, slap me back with silence, and get away with it? Steven didn't answer. He merely nodded once, as if acknowledging Victor's fury while calmly refusing to bow to it. The quiet strength emanating from him was palpable. And for the first time, Victor felt fear. Not the fear of being caught, but the fear of being truly powerless. The bellboy, watching from the side, stepped forward cautiously. He recognized the face, though he hadn't spoken up yet. Something in the eyes, the posture, the calm dominance, it was familiar. A hint of recognition sparked in his mind, but he kept it to himself. Meanwhile, the guests continued recording. The story unfolding before them was unlike anything they had seen. The slap, the silence, the calm defiance. Even in a world full of social media, it felt cinematic, almost unreal. Victor's voice broke. He stopped. He didn't know what to say. The room was tense. The guests leaned in slightly, waiting, and somewhere deep down, even Victor could feel it. The world he thought he controlled was slipping away, and he didn't even understand how or why. Steven took a step back, letting the manager's anger fully expend itself. He glanced at the lobby, at the guests, at the staff, and nodded slightly as if signaling that the lesson was about to begin, and the next chapter would leave no doubt about who held true power. The first act of conflict had ended. The hotel manager had struck. The guest had remained silent. The entire lobby had witnessed a clash of arrogance versus calm authority. And nobody would ever forget it. Little did Victor know. The true revelation was about to come, a revelation that would upend everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and the world he thought he owned. The lobby had fallen into a heavy, almost tangible silence. Even the distant hum of the air conditioning felt muted. Guests who had moments ago been moving freely through the space now froze, unsure whether to look, leave, or faint. Phones hovered in midair, some recording, some trembling in the hands of onlookers. The slap Victor had delivered reverberated not only through the marble walls but also through the air, leaving a sticky tension that refused to dissipate. Victor stood behind the counter, chest heaving, fists clenched, sweat beaded along his hairline. He could feel the gaze of every single person in the lobby piercing into him, weighing him down with judgment he hadn't anticipated. His authority, which had always felt absolute, now seemed fragile, brittle like glass, ready to shatter at the smallest touch. And all of it was caused by a man who hadn't even raised his voice. Steven Seagal, on the other hand, remained calm, serene, and almost impossibly composed. He straightened his jacket, picked up his small bag from the floor, and adjusted it neatly over his shoulder. His eyes, still locked on Victor, were unwavering. They carried the weight of someone who had faced storms far bigger than a hotel manager's rage, and had emerged untouched, a quiet storm contained in a human form. A few guests whispered to each other, trying to guess who this man could be. "I think he's a famous actor," one said. "No, that's not it," another replied. "He's something else." But none of the whispers could truly capture the aura surrounding him. There was something intangible, almost unexplainable, that demanded respect even from those who had never met him. The old bellboy, who had been leaning against the wall near the entrance, furrowed his brow. Recognition flickered in his eyes, the face, the posture, the calm precision he had seen it somewhere before. A magazine, a business news feature, perhaps a charity event. But even as his memory strained to recall, he couldn't yet place it fully. Something told him this man was no ordinary guest. Victor, sensing that his power was slipping, tried to reassert himself. "I'm telling you, get out. Security," he shouted, raising his hands as if that could intimidate the silent figure. A few guests flinched, but Steven didn't even glance at the threat. He simply took a slow, measured step toward the exit, each movement deliberate, controlled. The lobby felt smaller somehow, as if the air had thickened around the manager. Victor's ego, which had always been his armor, now felt like a weight dragging him down. He noticed the subtle shift in the room. Guests no longer looked to him for authority. Instead, their attention was entirely on the quiet, calm man walking past them. Their eyes followed every gesture, every movement, hanging on even the smallest details. Phones clicked and whirred. Cameras zoomed. People whispered and gasped. Even the families checking in forgot their luggage, their attention stolen by the unfolding drama. The spectacle was subtle but undeniable. A quiet confrontation had revealed something far deeper than anger or ego. It revealed the real balance of power. Then, just as the man approached the glass doors leading to the street, the old bellboy stepped forward, hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said softly, almost afraid to speak. "Sir, I think I know who you are." The man paused. He turned slightly, giving the bellboy a brief, polite nod, acknowledging him without breaking his calm demeanor. "You might," he said quietly, "but it doesn't matter." Victor noticed the exchange and felt an icy chill crawl up his spine. Something was happening, something beyond his understanding. He wasn't sure whether to be afraid or confused, but he did know one thing. The moment he had assumed would end with his authority confirmed was unraveling before his eyes. Outside, the faint sound of car engines approached. Black cars, heavy and sleek, slowed as they reached the hotel entrance. The bellboy's eyes widened slightly. Something told him that whatever was coming wasn't ordinary. He took a half step back, giving space, silently urging the manager to stay still. Inside the lobby, the guests sensed a shift, a tension that was no longer just between the manager and the guest, but between something ordinary and something extraordinary. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who is he? Is he a businessman? A celebrity? Victor's face paled. The first seed of realization began to take root. Something about this man's calm, measured demeanor wasn't just self-confidence, it was authority, power, and influence on a scale Victor had never experienced. And he had treated him with the lowest level of respect imaginable. As Steven reached the doors, he paused briefly, glancing back at the stunned crowd. There was no anger in his eyes, no need for revenge, only patience, quiet judgment, and the promise of a lesson about to unfold. And with that small pause, the lobby seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The true revelation, the identity of the man they had all underestimated, was about to shake the hotel to its core, exposing arrogance, humility, and the real meaning of respect in a way nobody could have predicted. The sliding glass doors at the hotel entrance opened with a quiet whoosh, and the soft hum of the lobby returned, but it was now charged with anticipation. Guests held their breath, some gripping their phones, some leaning forward on benches, eyes fixed on the figure who had walked in quietly and now stood near the threshold. Victor, the hotel manager, still trembling, could feel a cold dread creeping over him. Something told him the situation was far bigger than he had ever imagined. Outside, a sleek black car rolled to a stop. Its windows were tinted, but the vehicle radiated unmistakable authority, the kind of presence that announced power without a word. From inside the car, 3 sharply dressed executives stepped out, carrying large leather folders, their steps brisk and purposeful. They were clearly not ordinary visitors. Their demeanor commanded attention and respect. The bellboy's eyes widened. Recognition surged through him like lightning. The man in front of him, the one Victor had slapped, humiliated, and dismissed, was no ordinary guest. A flood of memories hit him. Magazine covers, business news segments, charity events featuring a quiet but commanding man with a reputation for transforming businesses, hotels, and communities. The bellboy's heart raced as the realization settled in. The executives walked past the velvet ropes and approached the front desk, stopping just behind Steven Seagal. One of them bowed slightly and said, "Mr. Seagal, we've been waiting for you, sir. Everything is ready as per your instructions." Victor's eyes went wide, his pulse quickened. "Wait. What?" he stammered. His voice cracked. "Mr. Seagal? You mean, that's him?" "Yes," Steven said calmly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller, heavier, more attentive. "I am the majority owner of this hotel, in fact, of this entire chain. And this branch falls under my direct oversight." Gasps erupted from guests. Some phones clicked rapidly as the crowd realized the truth. The man who had been slapped, humiliated, and dismissed was the very person who held all the power in the building, the one who could decide Victor's career, his fate, and the future of this hotel branch. Victor's knees buckled slightly. He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the counter. His mind raced. How had he been so blind? So arrogant? He had assumed his authority was absolute, that the loudest voice and the harshest hand controlled everything. And yet, here was the man he had treated with disdain, calm, composed, and radiating quiet command, proving that real power was silent and deliberate. One of the executives stepped forward, placing a folder on the counter. "Mr. Seagal, here are the final reports for the branch. Also, we have a recommendation regarding the management team." Victor's voice quivered as he spoke. "Sir, I didn't know who you were. I made a terrible mistake." His eyes pleaded for understanding, for some chance to undo the humiliation he had caused. Steven looked at him, eyes steady, unwavering. "That is exactly the point, Victor," he said softly but firmly. "Respect should not be given based on wealth, position, or appearances. You humiliated someone because you assumed they were beneath you. That assumption is your failure, not theirs." Victor swallowed hard, realizing he was completely exposed. His ego, the thing that had defined him for years, had been shattered, and yet, there was no need for yelling, no need for punishment. Steven's calm presence alone communicated the gravity of the situation. Guests leaned forward, some whispering to each other, amazed at the revelation. They had all witnessed arrogance confronted by quiet authority, and the lesson was unfolding in real time. Steven turned slightly and gestured toward the old bellboy, the one who had remained respectful and silent throughout the confrontation. "You," he said, "have integrity. From today, you will be the new branch manager." The bellboy's eyes widened. "Me," he whispered. "But integrity, humility, respect, these are far more valuable than loud authority or temporary control," Steven said. "You have shown them. You are ready." Victor, meanwhile, sank to his knees, his pride in ruins. "Sir, please, forgive me. I didn't know. I was wrong." Steven nodded once, his expression calm but commanding. Forgiveness is not the lesson here. Awareness is. Learn it, remember it, and let it guide you going forward. The executives quietly guided Victor toward the exit. The man who had once thought he was untouchable was now humbled, confronted by someone whose authority had been silent, steady, and absolute. Guests whispered among themselves, recording the moment, knowing they had witnessed something rare. A complete reversal of power, executed without anger or revenge. Steven simply walked toward the elevator, leaving the crowd and the humbled manager behind, carrying a lesson far louder than any yell or slap ever could. The lobby, once full of ordinary activity, now felt charged with something intangible. The reminder that true authority does not come from arrogance or aggression. It comes from respect, composure, and the quiet command of one's presence. And in that moment, Victor realized a truth he would never forget. The man he had humiliated was more powerful than he could ever imagine, not because of money or status, but because of the calm, quiet strength that defined real leadership. Victor stumbled backward, still gripping the edge of the counter, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His face was pale, sweat dampening his hair, and his chest heaved with a mix of fear, shame, and disbelief. For years, he had believed that authority was earned through intimidation and loudness, that power was the ability to command, to control, to be feared, and now, every illusion he had clung to was crumbling before his eyes. Steven Seagal's presence in the lobby was calm but unyielding. There was no need for raised voices, no dramatic gestures, yet every single person in the room felt the weight of his authority. Guests whispered among themselves, some nodding in recognition, others shaking their heads in awe. Even the staff, who had been nervous moments before, now understood the depth of what had just occurred. Victor's gaze fell upon the old bellboy who had been quietly observing everything from the sidelines. Unlike Victor, the bellboy had shown patience, humility, and respect throughout the confrontation. He had not laughed at the guest, not mocked him, not assumed he was less than because of his appearance. He had quietly done his job and maintained dignity even as the hotel manager embarrassed himself. Steven turned his attention toward the bellboy, his calm eyes meeting the young man's. "You," he said clearly, "have integrity. From this moment forward, you will be the new branch manager of this hotel. You've demonstrated the qualities necessary for leadership, respect, patience, and the ability to see people for who they truly are, not what they appear to be." The bellboy's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Me? Sir?" His voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. I don't know what to say." "Thank you." Steven gave a faint nod. "Your reward is not in thanks. It is in knowing you have done the right thing when no one was watching. That is worth far more than a title, money, or recognition." Victor, meanwhile, could barely comprehend what was happening. He fell to his knees fully, his hands pressed together in a pleading gesture. "Sir, I didn't know who you were. I acted arrogantly. I humiliated you. His voice cracked. "Please, forgive me. I am so sorry." Steven looked at him, still calm, still composed. "Forgiveness is not the lesson here," he said quietly. "Awareness is. You have allowed arrogance to blind your judgment. You have allowed ego to control your actions. Remember this moment, Victor, and let it guide you in the future. True authority comes not from fear, but from respect." Victor's head bowed lower. The weight of shame and understanding pressed on him like a heavy stone. He realized that his years of assuming power were hollow, that the respect he thought he commanded was superficial, and that one day, his actions or lack of humility could destroy the life he had worked so hard to maintain. The executives quietly guided Victor to the exit. The once proud manager left the lobby, head hung low, shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to the confident man who had walked in moments before. Every guest, every staff member, every observer in the lobby had witnessed the transformation, the collapse of ego, and the rise of humility. Meanwhile, Steven adjusted his bag over his shoulder and walked to the elevator with the grace and quiet authority that had defined him from the moment he entered the hotel. Guests and staff watched him go, feeling the impact of his presence long after he had disappeared from view. His actions, or, in many ways, his inaction, had left a lesson louder than any words or punishments could convey. The bellboy, now promoted to branch manager, felt a sense of purpose and responsibility he had never known. He straightened his back, looked around the lobby, and realized that respect, integrity, and humility were more powerful than fear or intimidation. His new role was not just a reward, it was a responsibility to uphold these values and lead by example. Victor would remember this day forever, the day his arrogance was confronted by quiet authority, the day he realized that true respect is earned, not demanded. He had been given a chance to reflect, to learn, to grow, and whether he did so or not would define the rest of his life. As the hotel returned to its normal rhythm, a sense of calm authority lingered in the air. The guests whispered among themselves, sharing stories of the encounter, recording moments on their phones, and silently acknowledging the power of quiet strength. The lobby had been transformed, not by loud gestures, not by punishment, but by the demonstration of integrity, patience, and true leadership. And as the doors closed behind Steven Seagal, leaving the lobby in awe, one truth was clear: humility, patience, and respect have a power that no arrogance or anger can ever match. The lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Guests resumed their check-ins and conversations, but something had changed. The air felt different, lighter, charged with a quiet awareness that everyone could sense but few could put into words. People whispered among themselves, sharing what they had witnessed, their voices tinged with awe and disbelief. They had just observed a lesson about power, humility, and respect, a lesson that no amount of yelling or authority could ever teach. Victor, the former hotel manager, sat quietly on a chair near the reception. His head hung low, his pride shattered, and his hands trembling slightly. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, trying to understand how a man he had dismissed and humiliated could possess such quiet strength. He realized, perhaps too late, that true authority was not measured by aggression, ego, or status, but by the way a person carried themselves and treated others even when no one was watching. Across the lobby, the new branch manager, the former bellboy, stood tall. He adjusted his uniform and straightened his back, a mixture of nervousness and pride evident on his face. For him, this promotion was more than a reward. It was a responsibility. He now understood that leadership was not about giving orders, making others fear you, or flaunting power. True leadership was about integrity, humility, and treating every person with respect, regardless of their status or appearance. Steven Seagal, the quiet force behind this lesson, had left the lobby, but his presence lingered. It was not just the fame, wealth, or power he carried that impressed those present. It was the manner in which he commanded respect without demanding it. He had not shouted, struck, or punished. He had only acted with patience, composure, and fairness, and yet, the impact was greater than any loud confrontation could have achieved. Guests whispered in astonishment. "Did you see how calm he was?" One said. "He didn't need to yell. Yet he completely turned the situation around." Another added, "And the hotel manager? He learned a lesson the hard way." Phones clicked and recorded as people shared the story, the lesson spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. The moral was simple, yet profound. Respect isn't something you show only to the powerful, the wealthy, or the famous. It's something you extend to everyone: the quiet guest, the humble employee, the person who seems ordinary at first glance. Because appearances can deceive, status can mislead, and one day, the person you overlook might be the one holding all the power, silently, patiently, and wisely. Victor, reflecting on his mistakes, finally looked up. He met the eyes of the bellboy turned manager and nodded faintly, a silent acknowledgement of the lesson learned. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words ever could. He understood now that arrogance and disrespect only lead to humiliation and regret, while humility and patience build true influence and character. Meanwhile, the guests continued their stay at the Royal Crest Hotel, but none would forget what they had witnessed that day. They had seen a clash of arrogance versus quiet authority, ego versus humility, and the triumph of patience and respect over aggression and entitlement. It was a story they would tell for years, a reminder that true power is not loud or violent but measured, deliberate, and respectful. Steven Seagal's quiet authority had left an indelible mark. He had not sought revenge. He had not demanded respect. He had simply demonstrated it through action. and in doing so, taught an unforgettable lesson. True power, it seemed, is silent. True leadership is earned. True respect is given freely but appreciated only by those who understand its value. And for every viewer watching this story unfold, remember that every person you meet deserves your respect. Your actions, patience, and humility matter far more than appearances or assumptions. One day, the quiet person you dismiss may hold the very power you never anticipated. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is stronger than arrogance. Share where you're watching from because the lesson of patience, composure, and dignity is universal, and it starts with each of us. The story had ended in the lobby, but the lesson would live on forever. And for those who witnessed it, guests, staff, and viewers alike, it was a reminder that respect is never wasted, and humility is never weak.